All right. Hello and welcome everyone to Research Pathways and Leadership in STEM. We're really excited to have two special guests here today, Ellen Considine and Kayla Sansevere. And we are happy to talk about some of the research opportunities that are available through STEM, planning your graduate school, pathways, and also looking for funding. This session is hosted by the Fellowships Advising and Mentorship Unit of the UNCG International Programs. And the two guests that we'll have today are both 2019 Goldwater Scholarship alumni. So if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat as we go along. I will be monitoring that and asking the questions to our two guests. And just some Zoom housekeeping. You can turn your cameras on if you would like. There will be an interactive portion of the session after the presentation for about 20 minutes, and then a section section for questions about 40 minutes afterwards. So we're hoping to have a lot of participation from y'all today and happy to answer your questions. But while the presentation is going on, you can keep your mics muted and cameras either on or off, whichever makes you most comfortable. So just to kind of start off with introductions. So I'm Heidi Bretz, I use she, her pronouns, and I am one of the assistant directors in the International Programs Center. I work with faculty who are developing short-term study abroad programs, but my capacity today is as the fellowships advisor for the university. So I work with the Fellowships Advising and Mentorship Unit, which is part of the International Program Center, to support students and alumni that are applying for nationally competitive scholarships and fellowships. So that would be Fulbright, Fulbright Student Program, Critical Language Scholarship, and most pertinent to this session, the Goldwater Scholarship. So if you have questions about applying for any of these awards, do let me know, and I'm happy to direct you where you need to go next. And with that, I will turn it over to our guests.
Great, thanks Heidi. We'll just briefly introduce ourselves. So I'm Ellen Considine. I'm currently a first-year PhD student in biostatistics, which is kind of like data science for public health at the Harvard School of Public Health. And as Heidi mentioned, I was a 2019 Goldwater Scholar.
Hi everyone, my name is Kayla Sansevere. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm currently a first-year PhD student at Tufts University in the Department of Psychology, and my concentration is in cognitive psychology. And also, like Heidi mentioned, I'm a 2019 Goldwater Scholar as well.
All right, so we are going to launch a quick poll. So if you can get ready to share your interests. And we'll leave that poll open for about a minute. What you're most interested in learning about this session, a little bit more about you all.
And I do want to add that for my understanding, these poll results are anonymous. So you don't have to be worried about, revealing information that you may not be comfortable with your name attached to it.
We'll leave the poll open for about another 15, 20 seconds. All right, looks like everyone is in. So we're going to go ahead and share the results. So it looks like most of you are in the life sciences, biochemistry, biology, neuroscience. About half have been involved in research within their classes or within a lab at UNCG, some experience outside of UNCG. looking for some more guidance on navigating STEM research, education, and leadership opportunities, you're in the right place. And looking to learn more about research and education pathways, identifying interests, and general advice, and then also the Q&A conversation.
So thank you to everyone for providing that information. And the reason why we ask those questions, right, is because it's helpful for us to know how we should structure this presentation and what information we should really emphasize and what are some things that maybe we don't need to emphasize as much, right? Because the point of this presentation is to be resources for you all. It's not useful for us if we're giving you information that you may already know or not particularly looking for during the session. So first, we're just going to touch upon sort of the what and why of STEM research, right? Because STEM is a very broad field and can mean a lot of things to different people. And the sort of first point of how do you know if you're interested in STEM research in the first place, again, because it's so broad and that can mean so many different things. And some advice that Ellen and I have from talking with another and our own experiences is getting involved in research, right? So this can mean inside your university or outside of your university. And I know typically, at least where I went to undergraduate schooling, there were frequently postings by labs if they were looking for research assistants. Say if there's studies going on where they're looking for volunteers, you could maybe then, to participate in their study. You could ask if they're looking for research assistants, opportunities like that. And by getting involved in research in the first place, right, whether it be inside your university, through classes, labs, or outside the university, that can help you figure out what your specific interests are and sort of exploring those pathways for those different interests and help you discover what types of questions you like asking and also pursuing topics that may be interesting you, but also may be contributing to the greater good of humanity as a whole. So with that being said, there are a lot of really great opportunities in STEM research. Again, that can allow you sort of have a more intrapersonal fulfillment in the sense that you're pursuing things that are curious and interesting to you while also contributing to the greater global good. And while Ellen and I both recognize that there are systemic barriers to research and STEM research in particular, we're not touching on that topic today, although we do recognize that just because that is a very large and difficult topic to have. And we don't feel like we have the space and time to talk about that topic during today's session. And this is a really great ending sentence in a sense for STEM research, and that this background knowledge can help us navigate and make the most of these STEM research opportunities that we'll be presenting.
Great. So to begin, we'll kind of cover, there are just a number of different pathways that you can take through kind of STEM education and research. Most of you are, in the middle of your undergrad, and you might, be more or less familiar with possible like graduate school pathways. So just to kind of lay out the kind of scope of educational, possibilities, in undergrad, your focus is usually mostly on courses. You might be doing some undergraduate research on the side to kind of figure out whether research and is something that you want to do, and also in what field, as Kayla was mentioning. In grad school, and especially in a PhD program, the focus is mostly centered on research. And the way that I kind of tend to think about things as a master's is typically, between 1 and 3 years, average of 2 years. A PhD can be anywhere from 3 to 7-ish years, with maybe an average around 4 or 5 years. Sometimes in some fields, the master's is kind of like gotten on the way to the PhD. And in some fields, it's common for people to do a master's and then to enter a PhD program if they determine that, the research is really something they want to dig into more. So you can kind of think of it as, if you're not sure what you exactly might want to do for research, you might consider a master's. If you're feeling relatively confident of kind of what your interests are, you could apply directly to a PhD. And some people, if they don't get straight into a PhD program they might do a master's and then a PhD. One of the biggest things to keep in mind, though, with regards to funding is that PhD programs in STEM are paid for, like they pay you, they cover your tuition and pay you a stipend, whereas for a lot of master's programs, you're actually paying tuition to attend like you are an undergrad. So that financial consideration can be kind of help you guide that choice. Kayla, did you have something to add?
Yeah, one thing in this that you brought up that it made me think of, so it is very common for people to go into a master's program and then a PhD program. And one thing to keep in mind, if that's something you're interested in, is getting a master's may not shorten the time you have to do your PhD, because I know there's issues with like transferring course credits. So for instance, I had a friend who did her master's first, was not admitted to a PhD program, and then decided to apply and enroll in that same university's PhD program. So even though she has her master's and went to the same exact school where she'll be getting her PhD, she still has to do the PhD program for 5 years instead of lessening it to 3 years or 4 years. So that's something to keep in mind as well. If you do decide to do your master's and your PhD, you may have to do your PhD for just as long as if you didn't come in with your master's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. So another just kind of consideration that might help you choose between these educational pathways as well is that, I mean, PhDs are very research focused. There are some disciplines where, you know, the PhD is kind of mostly just leading into a scientific or academic role. And then there are some disciplines where a PhD is also kind of a professional like qualification where, you know, for instance, so in my field of data science, like there are increasingly positions for PhDs in private industry as well. So like at Google or Microsoft or, you know, a whole host of other things. And, you know, this also applies across like various engineering fields, computer science. I think some of the life sciences like in pharma. So you can think of, you know, maybe kind of going in directions with your research or with the program that you're choosing that, you know, kind of connect to what you can see yourself doing afterwards. And so it's helpful to kind of have an idea of, oh, like I might, you know, want to become a professor, or I might want to go into private industry. I might want to work for the government or for an NGO, or kind of do a combination of these things. And then kind of determining what type of PhD or, you know, master's leading into that might kind of best serve you in pursuing that.
So some things to keep in mind, right? Talking about these various pathways for STEM research. Okay, so say you decide you want to do a master's or PhD, how do you even come to those decisions in the first place, right? Because those are really big decisions and are years of your life, right? And I understand that like it can be intimidating, especially when you're maybe not sure what you want to do in the first place, but there are ways where you can explore and try to help figure out what these future plans can be, right? And again, Elle and I can only speak from, I should have said this in the beginning, we can only speak from our own experiences and what has worked for us. So these suggestions may work for you, right? There are some things that, you know, we can give for advice that have helped us. So just to keep that in mind. And on that note, some things that Elle and I have figured out that worked for us and sort of helped us discover our research interests, why we want to pursue PhDs, is figuring out what interests you. And I will go into that, into how you can figure that out in just a bit. But also, what do you procrastinate? Because there's sometimes in a PhD or a master's program or any other sort of opportunity where you have to do things that you may not enjoy, and the ability to channel the things that you're interested in, but also to push through things that may be monotonous or boring is also very important. And also thinking about these other questions, like what is valuable to other people in addition to these sort of internal things, like what interests you. And really thinking about why you want to attend graduate school if you want to pursue a STEM research career. Of course, graduate school is not required to pursue a STEM research career, but the pathways expand a bit more easily facilitated when you do have a graduate degree. And I think thinking about these questions of why you want to attend grad school, if it's just to say, you know, have the PhD title, seems like really think about the internal motivations for why you want to do these things, because it can be very long and grueling and exhausting. And sometimes that internal motivation can really help you during those really difficult times. And this one idea, thinking a bit more broader, that progress is not linear. So you can envision a path and say, your first year, you thought you wanted to do one thing, and then your third year, you realize you want to do something different, but you've been working these past 2 years to accomplish this original goal. That's fine, right? And realizing that and accepting that is okay. And you can use sort of these skills from a path you've crafted before to influence this future path. And you can also explore your interests, more widely in terms of courses, getting involved in undergraduate research like we've been touching upon, whether, that be a participant in research and then being told what this research is about. Maybe that can spark some interest in you and you can discover your interest further. Doing internships and also, extracurricular opportunities. So a lot of these things, right, can really facilitate what brings you joy and what you could be interested in. And I think a really big piece of advice I have is to explore as widely as you can, because how can you know if you're interested or not interested in something unless you try certain things? And of course, talking to other people like graduate students, professors, things like that. Professors and graduate students should be interested in giving you this information, especially professors. Like, that is their responsibility to be a resource for you. And they should help you sort of figure out those interests along the way. And they should be very happy to, again, with graduate students as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything Kayla said. And just to reiterate the last point, I feel like pretty much all of my most kind of important opportunities for understanding more and kind of learning more about what is out there in terms of, different fields or work that I could be doing did come from just kind of showing up at a professor's office hours, showing up at like a student club meeting, just kind of this idea of like showing up to a presentation or reaching out to someone. And as Kayla said, like more often than not, people are happy to kind of reach back and help you out, especially if you're a student. So again, like I feel like the kind of getting over the hurdle, many of us in STEM or just more academic people tend to be a little bit more introverted. I know that's definitely true for me. And so it can feel like you're imposing on someone to, knock on a professor's door or send them an email. But really so many people are happy to help you out with this type of stuff, that I think kind of overcoming that internal barrier is super important and will just continue to open doors for you throughout, the course of your educational path and then career path. Another really big thing that can help you kind of on your path, both with figuring out what you want to do and pursuing opportunities, is to practice communicating your ideas. So your ideas about what you're interested in, and also kind of your personal narrative of how you became interested in these things, what you've done to explore your interests so far, and practicing both kind of on paper and out loud. So whether that's, talking to a grad student, one of your TAs, or kind of writing a blog or, writing an essay, those are all things that can kind of help you to identify and then kind of prepare yourself for future opportunities. Another piece of advice is to find ways to engage personally with the problem and also kind of to feel creative with it. So going back to what Kayla was saying about kind of figuring out what brings you joy. I remember, my undergraduate major was applied math, and I felt like, I was kind of, drifting through Calc 3 and linear algebra and in my first year and feeling like, oh, where's kind of the application, the heart of this field? And it was really through, there was like a kind of club/competition that I just decided to enter with a couple friends totally on a whim, that we ended up just being able to kind of like pull together really simple math tools, but then some interesting ideas from like economics and health that just like kind of made me feel like, oh, like I can actually do something interesting with these tools and this way of thinking, that then really kind of fueled me for the next couple of years. in terms of pursuing similar things and making the degree what I wanted it to be. So related again to the, kind of various activities and also opportunities, whether it's for an internship, research position, scholarship, our advice is just to throw your hat into the ring. You'll never get something if you don't apply. And it's always good practice to just, express kind of who you are, what you're interested in doing, and you may be pleasantly surprised. And some last, important things that we'll continue talking about a little bit is just, as much as I feel like our world can feel like it's all about just go, 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 more, more, more. We're constantly bombarded with kind of other people's greatest successes on various media platforms. It's super important to maintain a healthy work-life balance, and also to kind of focus on not just the accomplishments, but really the kind of the amount of like personal academic growth that you're making along the way, instead of just kind of the end of the line signposts. And our next slide has some examples of people kind of talking about imposter syndrome.
So these are quotes that I really liked that as a first year PhD student really resonated with me and actually brought me some comfort, because again, graduate school and STEM research can be very intimidating, especially if you feel like you don't have many resources to turn to find this information and get advice from. So this first tweet says, grad school isn't about already knowing how to do everything, but it's about learning the methods, getting experience, asking different questions, and building the confidence to work beyond what you already know. And further, right, it can feel like, at the start of grad school, even before graduate school, while you're applying, and maybe, seeing who else is applying to programs and, really comparing yourself to other people, this constant bug in your ear that's telling you, I don't know how to do much, and I feel like imposter because of it, right? And I know this is very hard to switch mindsets. I struggle with this on my own, but this good sort of reminder to tell yourself is that you may not know exactly what you're asking or what you're doing, but you're confident you can figure it out and that you have the appropriate support systems like a mentor, fellow graduate students, lab members to help you develop that confidence and can help you figure out the answers to these questions that you may have.
So that's kind of the scope of the general advice, and we're happy to answer the questions and do Q&A soon. But we also just did want to introduce you all to the Goldwater Scholarship, which is an opportunity that Kayla and I both applied for when we were in undergrad. This is a national STEM scholarship, so covers kind of all different STEM majors, and it sounds like if you're all in life sciences, you certainly qualify. The scholarship, it's both kind of includes a monetary component and also just a recognition component. And we didn't put that on the slide, but it can also be a potential networking opportunity with, we have a Slack channel and people introduce themselves so you can kind of connect with scholars who are different years in the program. So that's kind of the nice thing about applying for the opportunity if you get it. But even if it seems like a bit of a reach goal, applying for a scholarship like this, I think can really help to narrow down what kind of your story is, what you want to do. And it's a practice writing a research essay and a personal statement that can, serve you super well if you're also planning to apply to grad school or graduate opportunities such as the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship. So applying as a sophomore and or a junior is something that can kind of serve you well, even if that opportunity doesn't work out, which kind of ties back to a lot of the other things we were talking about. Should we move on?
I guess we can talk really quickly we can either talk about next steps right now, or we can save that for the end of the presentation if we would rather focus a little bit more on some of the questions that have come through in the chat.
Yeah, we might as well actually answer questions now and then maybe circle back to this if you want to stop screen share.
Yeah, so I guess Ellen and I should highlight the reason why we had this presentation so short and maybe just touched upon things is we realize, right, as students who have been to these types of sessions before, I feel like as an attendee, the most valuable sessions have been where I've been able to ask questions and have conversations. So really if these, and then when it's a Q&A and conversation time, then we can get more in depth to our specific experiences and sharing about, what advice we have from those own experiences. So just want to, I guess I should have prefaced with that, but now post-facing with that. So I did get 2 questions throughout the session that I want to put in the main chat, as you saw. So the first question asked to me was, if at this moment you were only thinking about going to graduate school route, is it because you feel like it will be a necessity to do the work that you want to do? Would you recommend trying to think about the whole process differently? Ellen, I'm not sure if you want me to start with this question or if you want to start.
Yeah, you can start and then maybe I'll add on my thoughts too.
So one thing I think that can be helpful if you decide that you want to pursue graduate school or not is thinking about what type of role you would like to play. So for instance, again, this is just my understanding as someone who primarily works in psychology, and I do have interdisciplinary research experience, but again, mostly to psychology. With a PhD, I'm able, if I so choose to continue academia, which I'm thinking I want to do, be a professor, a full tenured professor, hopefully eventually, and run my own lab. So I want to be able to think of the, design questions and be the one that's proposing these questions. And if I were to just get my master's, I would be able to be a professor, but not more so like an adjunct rather than like a full professor. And may be able to contribute to developing these questions that are being asked, but not the main person spearheading those efforts. So commonly, from my one research experience, our lab manager and our program manager just has their master's, so they're really facilitating these questions. But the person who is designing these questions and leading the effort was our team head who had their PhD, just to give you some idea. Ellen, I don't know if you have any additional input or from your different field to add to that.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, my understanding of, what you're asking is, is it worth it to do the full, grad school thing if you don't necessarily care so much about the grad school, but you more care about the end result? And this is definitely something that has crossed my mind before. But one thing, especially being a current grad student, that I would say in response is, if the work that you want to do afterwards requires the graduate degree, I would imagine that your work during the grad program will also, be quite similar, at least in terms of the research, right? Like the reason that you're doing the degree is to be able to kind of practice and learn the skills that you would need in that eventual path. I can say that, one common experience among grad students, especially in kind of STEM programs, but really across the board, is, potentially needing to take some courses that you don't feel as excited about, that are just kind of requisite. So for instance, in my program, I'm required to take a number of like statistical theory classes, and I admit that I do not find all of them, totally enthralling. I, know that I kind of have to get through it to get to the stuff that I really want to do. And that's, probably pretty similar to how you feel in some of your undergraduate courses. I think the balancing act is like, are the things that I will get to do in this program and be able to do afterwards, kind of post this educational experience, worth kind of going through the parts that I might not be as excited about? And that's maybe where you should think about kind of that balancing happening.
And one piece of advice I've heard is to say, look at, jobs that are posted on LinkedIn, on other resources, and see what their requirements are. Do you require just a master's to do this? Do you need a PhD to do this? Do you need a bachelor's? So trying to just think, as broadly as you can about what you could even, contemplate to yourself doing, right? Trying to cast this really broad net and then seeing what requirements are necessary to accomplish that goal. So I don't know if the person who asked that, if they want to DM me or say in the chat if we fully answered that question, so we can be sure. And then we can go to the next question if we need to add more to that, we can. So the second question is, and Ellen, if you want to answer this first, does every grad school have lab rotations to help further find your true interests?
So that's a good question. What I would say is it actually depends on the field as well as the individual program. So there's a pretty big range in PhD programs and also STEM PhDs, or masters if you're thinking about that too, with regards to whether at the time that you apply to the program, whether you're applying to kind of work with a specific PI in a specific lab, or whether you're applying to kind of the program overall, and then you'll have like time in the first couple years to then choose who you want to be your advisor or on your committee. So I think, Kayla, did you say that you kind of applied to work with a specific lab for your, and then whereas like my program, I just applied to the program and I said like, oh, here are a couple people that I can envision working with in my essay. But we get to do, kind of rotations, more or less formal, depending on kind of our funding for individuals. But so it really depends on the field and then also the program. And you can reach out to grad students in your field and also potentially at the program that you're looking at if you're kind of curious about learning more about how they specifically work.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm going to get to the next question that I posed in the chat. And again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat or to DM us. Again, this session is most beneficial to everyone if you let us know what questions you have, no matter how minor it may seem to you, right? Because we want to be resources for you. That's what we enjoy doing. That's why we're at this session, because we want to help everyone the best way that we can, because this process wasn't that clear for us as well. So this next question was, what if the research programs aligns with your interests, but you don't really like the environment in the lab? Like, can you not really connect with the PI or other members? So how I see it and how I was told throughout the process and what was a big driving force for me choosing my specific graduate program and the lab that I'm working with, is what matters. The degree you get matters, right? Like if, say you want to do, oh gosh, I can't even think of an example. Like biostatistics work, but you get your degree in psychology, right? You want to pursue a degree that lines up with your interests, right? But then further down the line, I would say what matters more, okay, let me backtrack. What matters more is the skills that you learn from your specific program and the networks that you can build and learn from the PI or principal investigator that you're working with, more so than like the research program itself. And if you have a principal investigator who is not supportive, it may be a toxic lab environment. And remember, you are going to be there for, if you're in your master's 1 to 3 years, your PhD, a minimum of 4, upwards of like 7 or 8, if you take a little more time to do the program. And the lab you work with should facilitate these goals for you and help you develop as a scientist, not regress any progress they may have or hold you back. So I would say, right, there could be like a really great research program at like an R1 institution, like, I don't know, Harvard, Yale, right, where they're the best of the best. Lab isn't, so I would steer away from it because, right, it's not like it matters that you went to a top 20 PhD program. Like that does not matter. What matters is the skills that you gain from your PhD program and how you can transfer those skills into a specific job. Helen, I don't know if you have more to add.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying about the importance of the mentorship fit and the other people working there. So actually, I spoke with a lot of different professors and grad students when I was kind of thinking about where to apply for grad school and then kind of considering my options. And a lot of my mentors, my undergraduate institution was University of Colorado Boulder. And a lot of my kind of closest mentors were actually kind of telling me this story of when they were applying to grad school, they kind of decided not to go to the most like prestigious programs that they got into because they felt like the environments there were just a little bit more of kind of like a pressure cooker. People were just like, not necessarily cutthroat, but just they would have been more stressed out. They would have had a less good experience. And so I actually went into my grad school kind of application process fully, intending to like be on the lookout for like potentially toxic environments, and was really pleasantly surprised that my current program where I decided to go, I felt like I would actually have some really positive mentors, and the grad students in the group didn't seem like they were just stressed out of their minds. So that, those were all factors that I really looked at. I do think there's a balance. Like if there is a lab or a program that you just think is like exactly what you want to do, you might be willing to kind of like trade off a little bit with kind of the personalities of some of the people there. But I would tend to agree with Kayla on this, that like, as interested as you think you are in a specific topic going into grad school, if it's like, kind of an established research area, there are probably going to be other people doing this work. So if there's like one really toxic person, you just could choose to go someplace else. And also, if there's someone who you really like working with, you might actually find yourself kind of drawn more to the things that they're interested in working on, just because they're such kind of a good mentor. So I've really heard people who've had kind of different experiences on that spectrum. And I think you should probably do some soul searching on kind of that balance of how committed are you to like a really specific research problem versus like, can you see yourself like actually really enjoying working with someone, or, just being effective working with someone during your program. And kind of dovetailing off that, I realize I might be rambling, but I think it's really important to recognize in the later years of undergrad and also in grad school that, at least I've found, I tend to do my best work, like my most kind of get the most done, be most creative, have the most success with researcher classes if I am happy, or at least not like super stressed out, right? And I think that's probably true for most people, that being in a healthy place just kind of can make everything else work. So that's something that you definitely want to keep in mind, and not just kind of let yourself be blinded by kind of only the academic considerations.
And I think one way, right, this question may think of, well, how do you know if a lab environment or principal investigator may be toxic in the first place, right? If say you're maybe only a sophomore or junior and, you just think you're in this lab, right, you haven't had much communication with them. You can always, if you're involved in research, ask your mentors if they know of this specific person, right? Like if they network with them, if they've had any experience with them, obviously keeping in mind that's that person's subjective experience. But they should be honest and right from what they know about this person, their interactions. If you go on a specific lab's website, seeing how often they publish with their graduate students, right? So are they giving their graduate students enough opportunities? Because to be honest, in graduate school, and beyond, it's this idea of publishing papers that can determine success in the long run. And while this idea of like perish, it's very common when looked at for like job applications, like after your graduate program, things like that. And one thing I kept in mind when looking at graduate programs, for instance, again, this is psychology, so it's different in life sciences in terms of like publications and how many authors are on publications. But I would see, okay, where are the graduate students on publications? Because this matters for psychology. So typically first author means that, they really led the project, they wrote the manuscript, all these sorts of things. And I would see, okay, are the graduate students in the front center of the author list, where it seems like that the PI gave them a lot of reign to work on this project, or like that sort of thing. I think that helped me. Again, I realize that's specific to psychology, but just trying to figure out what a lab environment was like before I necessarily interacted with that lab to get an idea.
Yeah, and in addition to, reaching out to your mentoring network, I'll just reiterate, I think talking with like the current students to get their opinions. Often I think students are happy to talk with you about their advisors and either, tell you how great they are or to dish the dirt. I think people are often very honest with that. So definitely don't be afraid to reach out to current grads.
So these next sort of questions I got sent to me. Oh, and I also want to be mindful if you're also getting DMs, or like if there's any questions that were brought up for you. I don't want to.
Yeah, I haven't seen any in the chat, so I think people are sending.
So these sets are, I guess we can take this one at a time. Ellen, if you want to answer this first, what is everything, or we can answer it together, what is everything you need for the application process?
I guess I would want to clarify, do you mean the application process for grad school or the application process for Goldwater? There are some overlapping
For grad
components,
school.
not all. Oh, for grad school. Okay,
Mhm.
cool. I at least, so for my field, and I know for kind of similar applied math, computer science, stats programs, you typically need an academic statement of purpose, which is kind of like, here are the things I'm interested in, here's what kind of I've done for research, and then here's what I'd like, what I'm kind of like proposing generally studying in grad school, and potentially who you might want to work with. So it's kind of just like why you're applying to the program. And then you also might have a personal statement depending on the program, or they might be combined into one where you kind of talk about some of your more kind of experiences that, oh man, I just saw a big thing pop up in the chat. Okay, anyways, so personal statement is just all of your kind of reasons for wanting to do this, and other kind of just like circumstances, activities that you've done. And then you also typically need like 2 or 3 letters of recommendation, your resume/CV. And oh, depending on the program, you might also need a standardized test score like a GRE or a GRE subject test. And all of that information you'll typically find just on a department's website. So Kayla, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, so I would say specifically with the graduate research exam, a lot of programs are deciding to make that optional or to get rid of it. But from my understanding, the GRE is a test that most programs are requiring. I know in the times of COVID, a lot of programs waived that requirement, and a lot of programs are rethinking that. So GRE exams, personal statements, or like statements of purpose, right? So that I'm Googling resources now so I can find a web resource of what that means and what that looks like. Your transcripts, sometimes it can be unofficial, so you don't have to pay as much money, but sometimes it's official. And letters of recommendation, which can vary in the amount for schools. And like Ellen said, if you go on a department specific website, it'll lay it out. The second question was, can you apply to more than one program at the same school? I don't know the answer to this question. It's possible, but I really don't know because I have not done that. I don't know if you have any advice for that, Ellen.
Yeah, so I know it really depends on the program. Most often you'll be able to see on the website of the program whether or not you're allowed to apply to multiple programs at the same school. So I know, for instance, like at the School of Public Health where I'm at, it's pretty common for people to be interested in, say, like biostatistics and epidemiology and to apply to both. Or I saw recently, like, there are a good number of people who might apply to like an economics program and a public policy program. So it'll typically say on their websites if they get a lot of people who are trying to do that, or, you know, if you don't see it on their website, you can reach out to the department and ask, and they should be able to tell you. And then that third question that you had shared, Kayla, what question should you ask or consider when choosing a grad school? I feel like that's, you know, definitely kind of a longer conversation, certainly that we're happy to expand on. Some of the main things that I would say, you know, just kind of keeping in mind research interests, the advisors like who kind of align with those research interests. So the intersection of the two. I would say, you know, potentially other opportunities at the school, like whether it's, you know, the school itself, like some organizations that you can be a part of, whether or not, so for instance, for my program, biostats, sometimes biostatistics programs are in a School of Arts and Sciences, so they're more like a math program, and sometimes they're housed in a School of Public Health. And so depending on that difference, you might be having more classes with, say, like engineering students, or you might be having more classes with public health people. And so kind of thinking about how your program is like positioned in the larger ecosystem is another thing. The funding, you know, once you've actually applied to a place, whatever the funding offer is, and also like where you would be living is not a small thing at all. So those are certainly some of them. if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, I think you said a lot, where, again, me and Ellen are PhD students, right? So we can only speak on where, our specifically, but again, keep in mind, like master's programs will be shorter. I had to ask myself where I'd be happy living for at least 5 years, right? I grew up on the East Coast. I've went to undergrad very close to where I grew up in New Jersey. And now I'm in Massachusetts. I just prefer living on the East Coast, right? And I applied to some schools that were more further west, like in California and Utah, right? But I realized I enjoy staying on the East Coast. So that was, one factor I try to consider, right? But not letting this be the driving factor is a really big thing to consider. I would say funding is also a good thing to consider. Usually funding amounts will match the cost of living in a specific city. But, to be like completely transparent, right? Like the graduate student stipends can be very low. So that's something to keep in mind. Like, are you going to live somewhere? Well, you need like several roommates because, the cost of living in the area is higher, things like that. And then also, of course, considering, does this graduate school, will it teach me the skills, allow me to explore my interests to the best of my abilities? And the best way that you can see that is by going on faculty members' websites that you may be interested in working with and seeing who their graduate students are, if they post their, curriculum vitae or CV or resume, and seeing what they've been involved in, so you can see how their time in the lab has been shaped. I also like to do that just to see, okay, this person was accepted into a lab I would like to work in. What experience did they have that could help get them to work in this lab that I would also like to work with? Not in the sense to like negatively compare myself to this person, right? But that helped me understand, what does this person expect me to have in this research experience, how, that can also lead to other sorts of ways to explore. So yeah, that's some ramblings I can think of.
Yeah, so
Like,
listening to you talk about it, I feel like it also occurred to me looking at the course requirements, because programs can vary a lot depending on kind of how many courses they expect you to take before just diving straight into your research. And also, kind of what types of courses you'd be taking. Another thing is whether the program would allow you to pursue kind of external opportunities during the course of the program. So some programs, might allow you to do like an internship over the summer, and some programs might not. So that's something you can clarify ahead of time. And then in terms of kind of identifying grad programs that you might want to apply to, a lot of fields will have kind of lists of like prestige. So that's where a lot of people start looking. But what I would actually recommend is, if you're interested in a certain area, whether you have kind of a professor who's working in that area and you're doing research with them, or you're just doing some reading on your own, trying to identify, okay, where are some of the people located who are publishing the really interesting work that I would want to do. Say you read a paper that you really like, and the PI on that is located at a university, like maybe checking out their program. And then also just asking your mentors, what are kind of interesting programs based upon your interests, that they would recommend you checking out. And, professors will have a good sense of kind of the larger range of possibilities. I also want to make sure we have time to answer. We got a longer question that I just didn't copy because I feel like we can probably like paraphrase a little bit. So this question's asking, even if you have like a reasonably good idea of what you want to do and, feel like you can explore for the next couple of years, just kind of advice on balancing like work and life, not wanting to push away friendships or other meaningful opportunities, but also, not wanting to like lean so far back into kind of the life side that you don't actually manage to pursue your goals. I guess I can start a couple of just kind of brief thoughts on that. I feel like I do think that kind of reevaluating every so often can kind of, and being really honest with yourself, right, about like, am I actually like enjoying life? And not just, okay, the night before I have a huge exam and I'm stressed, or I'm, finishing up a big homework assignment, but kind of like over the course of like a half semester to a semester, like, do I feel inspired, or do I feel like kind of burnt out? And I feel like that can be kind of a good like grounding self-check, like, should I kind of rebalance? So I feel like for myself, I tended to kind of try and like restructure or rebalance on kind of the half semester to semester time frame throughout the course of undergrad and also in grad school. And that can kind of help to like trial and error. But I would also say just that, don't be afraid to take advantage of other opportunities that might not sound like exactly like, science research. Like research is important, but exploring other things that can help you to kind of further define what you think is important and what you're interested in can really help kind of ultimately to guide your path. So for instance, something that I found really meaningful during undergrad was participating in Engineers Without Borders as just kind of a volunteering thing. And that really helped me figure out what I actually wanted to do. And like, also I made a ton of really close friends through that. So I guess I would say like, if you can find ways of kind of combining your like life things and your, kind of academic things, that's great. Or you're kind of figuring out what you want to do. But obviously it can be really hard to balance with finite time and lots of cool things. And I would just say, yeah, kind of try to be really honest with yourself on a pretty regular basis, and best of luck for kind of figuring out that balance.
Yeah, so I like to say work-life balance I don't like to say work-life balance because I feel like sometimes there's not always the balance between like academics and personal life. Sometimes you have to dedicate more time to your academic life than your personal life, and then vice versa. So for instance, like finals, right? Like for finals, you have to dedicate more time to your studies usually because that's like the end of the semester. So I like to say work-life synergy, right? Because I'm constantly playing off of each other in this sense. And I really struggled with this idea of work-life synergy, right? So balancing what I need to do to achieve my academic goals versus like having a personally fulfilling life. And it wasn't until I feel like this past summer before I went into graduate school where I really realized that I feel like I didn't know, like, I felt like a lot of my self-identity became my academics, right? So I just really push people to consider these sorts of questions, like, and in the sense that you should consider, and, sometimes we had to prioritize our academic, stuff and, doing things that we can to have these, whatever we want to be, but then also like not losing yourself at that, like making sure that you are taking time for yourself and you are doing things that are also personally fulfilling. And that's a whole nother conversation, but I really like one piece of advice I really want to recommend outside of like this general advice about some in particular research is just maintaining this work-life synergy, because it can be really difficult, especially like I feel like the further you get along in graduate school and undergraduate especially.
Yeah. Just to be cognizant of time, Heidi would now be a good point to share the last couple of slides just with next steps.
Yes.
Because certainly some of these conversations could be continued.
Yes, so I will go ahead and share a few next steps for maybe how to get involved in research here on campus, some other opportunities to pursue funding and get resources, but then also, I don't know about you, Ellen, Kayla, but I'm happy to stick around for a few minutes and we can stop the recording and have kind of more of a kind of an organic conversation if y'all have the time and space for that. But I did want to just go over these next steps real quick, so those of you who have to jet can have that information. So next steps, there are plenty of research opportunities at UNCG that you can consider. Some of the ones I wanted to highlight here are the STAMPS program, which is a National Science Foundation funded scholarship for folks who may be from underrepresented backgrounds who are pursuing careers in STEM. The MarkU-STAR program, which is for folks who are interested in pursuing research. And that is, they actually have a pre-mark program, so you can get some information before you actually apply for that particular funding. And that is through the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. So there are a lot of really good resources through that organization. The McNair program, which also supports student research opportunities, pairing you with mentors and other ways to further your research experience. And then ERSCO, which stands for the Undergraduate Research Scholarship and Creativity Office. They have a number of resources and also can help if you have a faculty member that you're thinking of working on research with, they can help with potentially supplying funding for that. And of course, you can always come see us at the Fellowships Advising and Mentorship Unit. We like to call ourselves the FAM, so come visit us. We do have a website that has a lot of good resources about applying for different awards. I know one of the things that our speakers mentioned was the importance of being able to really be able to communicate your ideas clearly to folks about what you're interested in, what your research interests are. Really a great way to do that is to apply for one of these competitive fellowships and scholarships, because you'll be working on some of those skill sets like writing personal statements and research proposals that will really help you as you approach grad school and of course further on down the road. So you can go to our website, international.uncg.edu/fellowships to fill out an applicant interest form, and I'll follow up with you. We are hoping to have some small group mentoring sessions with Ellen and Kayla. So if you are interested, again, email fellowships@uncg.edu and we will put you on our interest list. If you are interested in applying for that Goldwater Fellowship and you are a rising junior or a rising senior, which means that you'll have a few semesters left as of fall 2022, feel free to reach out about that. And the campus deadline for you to submit your interest is going to be November 1st. So keep an eye on that. If you have questions, feel free to visit the website or to give us an email. And then again,
one quick clarification.
Sure. Yes.
So actually, if you meant, so like students who are finishing up their first year or finishing up their second year right now, because so you can apply for the Goldwater during your sophomore year or during your junior year.
Right.
Just so that's clear. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I know their way that they kind of express that can be a little bit confusing, but if you think you're interested, talk to us. We'll help you find out if you're eligible and direct you to the appropriate award. And that Goldwater campus deadline is the deadline for you to express your interest in the Goldwater Fellowship, and we'll work with you to get your submission ready for the national submission date, which is at the end of January 2022. And then there are some resources, like we said, we've shared the link to the presentation. We'll also be sending out a recording of the session, but there are some resources here: intro video resources list, in-depth guide to successful scholarship applications. All right, and with that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude our recording and turn it over to our presenters if they're available to stick around for your questions. So thank you all so much for attending, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.